Okay, so this one is going to be more balanced talk, and I need my freaking sunglasses today. I hate spring. I always will. Now later. Okay. So, this one is going to be more on, I guess, part 3 of balance and stuff. But I'm going to kind of focus in on the main 4 martial classes in 5e. The Fighter, the Ranger, the Barbarian, and the Paladin. Because they all share a lot of commonalities. Mostly like D10 hit die, light and medium armor, heavy armor in the case of the Fighter and Paladin, but they share a lot of things. Extra attack level 5. So, but first I want to frame it. What exactly? Like, any time that there's similar options, people are going to compare them. And I know this is true because I'm people. Any fighting game I've ever played, any game I've played that has multiple options, like, 2 swords that have different stats, you're going to compare them. And that gets sorted, and one is better than the other. And that's kind of just the nature of a lot of systems. Unless you make every single option very different from each other, then where it gets hard to directly compare them. Unless you do that, it's just going to be really easy to tier list it out. Whether that's true or not, because everything is, while there's certain things you can compare mathematically, there's always going to be subjective stuff. Case in point, this isn't something I'm going to talk about much, but in 5e, the monk class, mathematically, across everything, like monk stunning strike, not that good. But online, you see tons of people always talking about how fantastic stunning strike is. In this boss combat that they had last week, they stun locked the boss, burned through all their legendary resistances, all on their own, and then they just demolished the boss. Okay, great. That's wonderful that worked out for you in that one particular combat. Mathematically, at some point, it's going to stop working for you, and you're just going to be wasting ki on it. That's kind of the idea. Oh, it looks like my phone's memory is filling up. I got to get rid of some old videos that are already uploaded. So, more or less, these 4 classes: Fighter, Ranger, Barbarian, Paladin. In Tier 1 and Tier 2, they're all pretty similar. They all have 1 or 2 attacks in Tier 1 and Tier 2. And they start to get differing options, but also I'm not going to go too much into subclass options. I'll touch on them, but I'm not going to break them down completely. So first, a quick description of all of them, just to lay it out, or at least lay out how I perceive them. And and I'll touch on some other issues in 5e, how these classes are balanced, or rather, what martials need to be able to do. So, first you got Fighter. All armor proficiency, all weapon proficiencies. Standard stuff. You get all fighting styles, which is good, but you're probably just going to pick either archery, superior technique, if you're not using a bow or crossbow. You might pick duelist if you're using a spear and a shield with polearm mastery. If you're doing that, maybe you're using a great weapon, and then you're probably not even going to pick great weapon fighting. You'll probably pick defense for extra AC. That's probably what you'll pick if we're just looking at it mechanically. But otherwise, yeah, level 1 you get fighting style, level 2 you get action surge, this is one of the single best features in the game. Level 3 you get your subclass, which has cool stuff. Battle Master's got a lot of interesting options. Samurai's fun. Echo Knighter is the best subclass to pick because it's dumb. Level 4 you get an ASI, and then level 5 you get into tier 2, get extra attack. 6 you get another ASI. 7 you get a subclass feature, which some of them are good, some of them are bad. I think actually most of them are decent. Then level 8 you get a third ASI. And I'll talk about tier 3 collectively, all 4 classes. But then level 9 you get, I think, Indomitable, which is a bad feature. It does not work very well. Level 10 you get something. I don't know what fighters get at level 10. And then level 11 you're into tier 3. Then Barbarians, you get level 1, you get Rage. That's like the entire character defining thing. Reduce your damage, reduce damage being taken, do a little extra damage. A lot of the time I feel like it's not enough extra damage. It's a really small amount per attack, but it's also the type of feature that does technically encourage the Barbarian getting more attacks, but there's not a whole lot of ways for Barbarian to do that outside of just grabbing Polearm Master. And next you've got, at level 3 you get your subclass. They're all kind of Totem is amazing. Zealot is fantastic. The rest are kind of Level 4 you get an ASI. Level 5 into tier 2 extra attack. Then you get more and more stuff. You get some subclass features. You get others. You get more movement. You get unarmored defense way back at level 1. I forgot to mention that. Then once you get, like right before you get into tier 3, you get brutal critical, which is bad. Then as you keep going, and Ranger, very similar to the fighter early on. You get your various proficiencies. You get a fighting style, which Ranger gets most of the fighting styles that fighter has access to. I think you miss out on 1 or 2 of them. I don't remember which. Which that's something for Barbarian. They don't get a fighting style, which I find really weird. But then Ranger gets fighting styles. Then at level 2 you get spell casting, which is strong. They're a half caster, Ranger and Paladin are. But this is one thing that a lot of players kind of not ignore, but a lot of players get hung up on Hunter's Mark and miss out on a lot of like the really cool utility spells that Rangers do get. Things like Pass Without Trace, Good Berry's good. You know, there's a lot of specific spells you get, like Absorb Elements. You get that. There's a lot of good spells that Rangers get access to that people just try to shoe in Hunter's Mark for extra damage on your weapons. And in tier 1 and tier 2, that's fine. But tier 3, you're not going to get enough out of that. I feel like you should be doing something else, especially in tier 3. But then level 5, you get into tier 2, you get extra attack, you get some other stuff here and there, you get more and more spells. Most Ranger, at level 7, you get a subclass feature, and I think at this spot, most of them are good. Oh, in particular, a lot of Rangers have really good, a lot of Ranger subclasses have a really good 3rd level feature, particularly Gloomstalker. Then you keep going. The late 10s, like 9 and 10, they're like okay levels for Ranger. Especially in Tasha's, you get that Vanish ability. Yeah, it's Vanish. You can just turn invisible for a turn. That's really good. Then you get into tier 3 with Ranger, and tier 3 is where Ranger starts to have a slight issue, unless you're focusing, the spell casting is still good, but they don't get as much once you start to get into tier 3, and I'll touch on that. And then Paladin, really similar. You get fighting styles. You don't get archery because Paladin. Level 2, you get spellcasting and Smite. Smite is like the main defining feature of Paladins. You turn spell slots into raw damage on attacks that already hit. You can confirm them. Like you decide after the attack hits that you want to smite, blah, blah, blah. Then an extra attack at level 5 into tier 2. You get or protection level 6. Amazing feature. Then you get a few things. I think at level 7 you get a second aura that's based more on or that comes from your subclass. So, but that's really specific. I think you get it at level 7. It might be level 9. Who knows? Then level 8 ASI, level 9, you get third level slots. Level 10 you get something, and then level 11 into tier 3. Paladins have a really good tier 3. Because they get infused divine smite, but I'll touch on that again. So, now they're kind of laid out. What are the differences between them in like tier 1? Well, in tier 1, they all kind of function similarly as the base. Like, you're this character that's going to be doing weapon attacks in some way, you have good health, you have good defenses, depending on how you build the character. And then you start to get like at level 1, they're all very similar, outside of the Barbarian, who utilizes Rage to be even tankier. And that's mostly all you use it for at level 1. Then at level 2, you get, like, I think Barbarians start to get Reckless Attack, so that their average damage goes up. They hit more consistently at the cost of getting hit more consistently. Rangers and Paladins get spell casting. And while the Paladin can start to turn their spell slots into extra damage and build up a small amount of extra damage over the course of the day, Rangers get more utility-based stuff, which is cool and supportive. And fighters get Action Surge to be able to burst down, say, an important target or really take care of a clutch moment. That's what fighters get. Then you get your various subclasses, and I'm not going to go too much into them. Some base classes have better subclasses than others. But for the most part, all 4 of these classes play pretty similar with twists on them. They're not the same, but their strong points, I think, balance against each other well enough. Now, notice I didn't talk about, like, the favored foe features for a Ranger, because it's just like there. It doesn't do a whole lot, this is going to tie into that favored foe rework that I have, that I want to talk about also. But then in tier 2, it's mostly the same. Everybody gets their second attack, but it just pushes the damage higher. They can kill stuff faster, and they have more HP, but the HP scales slowly. It's not like a sudden jump where your damage output just doubles. Then you've got, nobody gets like a big thing after extra attack, more or less. You get like some utility features, support features, like Aura of Protection, more spell slots, so Paladins can do more, get more and more smite damage. Barbarians don't really get too much direct offensive improvements. Fighters don't either, but they get more ASIs, so that's part of their design because they're pretty feature light. You get more feats to add features to your character. That's just how fighters work. But that pretty much continues all the way to tier 3. Like, these classes are pretty close together until tier 3. I think they're very well balanced against each other. None of them stand outright above, head and shoulders above any of the other 3. That was my turn. Very deceptive. It's one of those roads that it's technically like a main highway route, but then it also has like its own street name, and GPS calls it by the street name, but those signs aren't anywhere. It's one of those. But anyway, Yeah, in tiers 1 and 2, I think all of these classes are very well balanced against each other. They all work pretty well. None of them are outright better than any of the others, and they all function pretty well. But then in tier 3, you start to have a bit of a gap, because in tier 3, right at the start, level 11, 2 of the classes get really big improvements, Fighter and Paladin. Fighter gets a third attack. So they can make 3 attacks per turn. That's accentuated by Action Surge. It plays into the rest of their features nicely. Paladin gets infused Divine Smite, so that all of their attacks do an extra 1d8 radiant damage. So things like Polearm Master are even more enticing for a Paladin, because you can just add that extra die right on top of it, regardless of how much damage the Polearm Master attack actually does. Or if you don't have that, maybe you're just doing 2-weapon fighting and it's kind of not great, but you can still add that extra 1d8 on top of it if it hits. Barbarians don't really get anything like this. Their extra rage damage jumps up by 1 point. Woo! So they can do friggin', if both of their attacks hit, or if they only have 2 attacks and they both hit, they do an extra 2 damage per turn. And if they have Polearm Master, it's 3. Ooh, 3. Rangers get a feature in their subclass at this level, which is usually kind of like a great value extra attack. It's not exactly extra attack, but a lot of them are ways to get an extra attack or ways to add extra damage onto stuff. Like Gloomstalker already has an extra attack at the start of combat, but at level 11, a Gloomstalker gets the ability, if they miss with one of their attacks, they get an extra attack. So their average damage goes up. Their max doesn't, but on average they'll hit more, because when they miss, they get a second chance on once, pretty much. Like Horizon Walker, when they get the ability to teleport around and stab multiple targets, or shoot multiple targets, and whatever they're doing. And then if they hit 2 different targets, then they get to attack a third. And that's not great, because in 5e, you want to be focusing down single targets. You want to be getting rid of as many enemies as quickly as possible. And spreading out your damage doesn't work for that. Ideally, the whole party should be focusing on one dude until that guy's down, then you focus on the next guy. You know, mathematically, that's what you want to do. And then Barbarians at this lane, they just start to get like the brutal critical stuff, which is not very good. Because yeah, if you're reckless attacking, you will crit more often. Because one, you are attacking with advantage, and you're doing it way more than like any other class really will. Like Barbarians are attacking at advantage like almost all the time. So you will crit relatively frequently, but it's not as big of a damage boost as it sounds like. So, like, it doesn't compare to having a third attack or having a consistent 1d8 on all your attacks, or even some of the boosts that Rangers get, which are not all created equally. Some Ranger subclasses basically get nothing at level 11. Like, they get some more ribbony type features that don't really help. Some of them are fine, some of them are not. But tier 3 is where you start to get disparity between these 4 classes. And that's kind of a problem. And for one, speaking as an amateur designer, this is kind of where, like, you know, that rework of the player's handbook and stuff, hopefully they touch on these kind of issues, but what can you do in the meantime as a DM that's very liberal with their homebrew? Well, you can give those. You could give, theoretically, Ranger and Barbarian a little help in other ways. Like, say, for each brutal critical die, in addition to getting an extra damage die, the critical threshold lowers by 1. That's probably really strong. But I think it works. It's fine. It's probably not that big a deal, and I feel like you always want to err towards making stuff a little bit too strong, and then you can dial it back if you need to. Playtesting is important. But what do you do for Ranger? Because a lot of the stuff I was thinking about, or I was designing with initially, and we used this in Erlmeyer for a while, was basically favored foe. The Tasha's feature would basically just be Hunter's Mark. You designate a dude, he's your enemy, you do extra damage to him. Now, but it's a whole feature that maybe it's concentration, maybe it's not, that lets you add up to a D8 on all your attacks. At level 11, Paladins do that for free. Is that fair? Is that balanced? Now, the real answer is maybe, because of everything else the classes are capable of. But when you really break down everything that Paladins and Rangers do, it's not very balanced against each other. Because if that were one of the best features that Paladins get, and that's one of their only ways to increase their damage, sure. If they didn't have spellcasting and Divine Smite at all, and they had some other really mild damage boost as a replacement or some other utility feature, then improved Divine Smite would probably be relatively balanced versus the Ranger class. But that's not the case. So as a result, I came up with this reworked favorite foe feature that is it's on the more complicated side. You can do a lot with it, but it's more than just a flat-out damage boost. And it increases at those important benchmarks. It increases you get it at level 2, I think. You get it at level 2, it increases at 6, 11, and 14. The damage die scales up, you get more uses of it, you can use it offensively and defensively. Then, a big one was at level 11, you can start to add your wisdom as a flat. You can add your wisdom modifier as a bonus to damage rolls only. You can add your wisdom modifier to the damage an attack does. So, you're doing an extra between 1 and maybe 3 or 4 extra damage whenever you hit with a weapon attack, depending on what your wisdom is. And that also offers a little bit of support if you want to be a more wisdom-focused ranger with a higher spell save DC. Once you get to this point, now you can start to pump your damage up a little bit more. Which, if your dex is a little bit lower, let's say your dex is a 14 or maybe a 16, but your wisdom is also a 16, so you'll hit a little less often and you'll do a little bit less damage. So this is a way to shore it up just a bit. But favored foe in general is also a way to shore up this damage and just increase it without it just being you add this much damage on everything forever. Which, you can go back and watch that video. The favorite foe rework, instead of me going over it here. But yeah, that's kind of the idea. A lot of these classes, in certain contexts, are pretty well balanced against each other, and especially in Tier 1 and 2, all 4 of those martial classes are perfectly fine to play. Taking them all the way up, taking them into Tier 2 is great, is fantastic. The problem is, some of the classes don't get as much into Tier 3, and that kind of nudges some players towards multi-classing, which is both good and bad. But, yeah, that's all I really had to say on this subject.